case of Esmeralda Riches. Today, we will find ourselves in the state that covers nearly 3/4 of the island of Haiti. It is the Dominican Republic. Our story begins on the Azure Coast, one of the most popular beaches in the Dominican Republic. A black Honda Accord pulled into a parking lot by the beach. Soft music played in the car as 2 men and 3 girls chatted animatedly about various topics. They appeared to be longtime friends reuniting for a casual outing. All the passengers exited the car and strolled leisurely toward the sea. A grown man called out to one of the girls and took her hand. He whispered something in her ear, and she shouted to her friends that she would return later. The beach was nearly empty in the evening, making it a spot for both rendezvous and solitude. They quickly got back into the car and talked for a long time. The man gently stroked her long hair and touched her full lips, which, like a strong magnet, drew his kisses. A few hours after the walk, the girl returned home and went to bed. The next morning, her mother noticed her daughter had not come for breakfast. She went to her daughter's room and knocked on the door, hoping to wake her, but there was only silence. The woman entered the room and let out a scream. At the sound, the girl's father rushed in. A horrifying scene greeted the parents. The whole bed was flooded with blood, and in the bathroom, on the floor in a pool of blood, lay their daughter. She was dead. From what they saw, the couple's legs gave out, but the father found the strength to call the police. Around 8 a.m., police arrived at the scene, examined the girl's room, and interviewed the parents. The body was taken to the National Institute of Forensic Medical Examination to establish the cause of death. The parents cried and wondered what could have happened to their daughter at home at night. But the events preceding this tragedy began to develop much earlier and escaped the parents' eyes. Today, before us will be a modern story of impossible love between a grown man and a young girl. She was 16-year-old Esmeralda Riches Martinez, born August 23, 2006, in the province of La Altagracia, in the family of restaurant owners Elio Rosti and Isabel Martinez Riches. She grew up in a complete, happy family and had an older sister with whom she was very friendly. Esmeralda grew up to be a very pretty and bright girl. She loved to sing, dance, and displayed her special artistry, which she was proud to show in videos for social media. In 2023, Esmeralda was in her senior year of high school and was planning to go to university. She was always surrounded by friends because the girl's cheerfulness attracted not only her peers to her. 35-year-old John Kelly Martinez was among Esmeralda's close friends. John Kelly entered the public education system after passing a competitive teacher's exam and was undergoing induction for new teachers. He was still on probation, which lasted for 1 year. The pupils took a great liking to the new teacher, as he treated them like friends and had regular outings outside of school. Despite the fact that John was married to another teacher and had 2 daughters, he devoted most of his free time to his students. For a long time, the teacher painstakingly built a trusting relationship with them, disposing them to him. They were mostly bright and beautiful students, such as Esmeralda. The evening walk on February 12, 2023 was a perfectly normal meeting of teacher and female students outside of school. Esmeralda was the last person John Kelly picked up that evening. He followed her into the house, introduced himself as a teacher, and promised to bring her back home. The group of 2 grown men and 3 young female students then headed to the beach in Teacher Kelly's car. After stopping, everyone got out of the car, except John Kelly and Esmeralda. John and Esmeralda were alone for a while, but afterward joined the company. They drank a few beers and took a short walk along the shoreline. Suddenly, Esmeralda felt sick. The girl started bleeding during the walk, forcing them to cut it short and bring her back home. In the morning, her parents found her dead. An autopsy revealed that it was a homicide, but the parents did not get answers to their questions. The National Institute of Forensic Medicine tentatively determined that Esmeralda Riches' death was due to a perineal laceration with severe internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock, following violent acts. As a result of the autopsy, the girl's death was classified as a violent death of undetermined cause. However, the question remained, who dared to do such a thing when Esmeralda was in familiar company on a walk supervised by a teacher? Interviews with the girlfriends and a review of the seized phones provided clarity and identified the first suspect. The testimony of one of the girls who had been out with the teacher and Esmeralda that evening was stunning. She said she saw the professor slip 5 pills into Esmeralda's drink while they were on the beach. The initial findings of the police sparked a lot of talk in the Dominican Republic, where abortion is banned. There was a lot of speculation in the community about the cause of Esmeralda's death. Some said she died of a heart attack, while others were sure she died from blood loss, caused by the abortion pills John Kelly had allegedly given her. Everyone hoped that the medical examiner's report would put an end to the rumors and speculation. However, all the speculation dissipated when the results of the forensic examination were ready. Upon learning the results, which ruled out the possibility of pregnancy, Esmeralda's relatives were clearly puzzled and very skeptical. The victim's relatives stated that the family was unhappy that the report ruled out Esmeralda's pregnancy because this theory best matched what investigators had found out based on the forensic examiner's tests and findings, as well as the evidence collected during the investigation. After all, a review of the Esmeralda's friends revealed many text messages that, although indirectly, indicated the teacher's long-term interest in the student. After the unsuccessful version of pregnancy, the investigation concluded that John Kelly drugged the girl without her consent and roughly abused her on the beach, which led to profuse blood loss and, a few hours later, to the death of Esmeralda. The results of repeated toxicology tests were pending. Given the progress of the investigation, the prosecutor's office requested a coercive measure against John Kelly Martinez, and his office requested a coercive measure against John Kelly Martinez and his alleged accomplice, Ruben Murillo Martinez, as they are the main suspects in the young woman's death. John Kelly Martinez was suspended as a teacher for 90 days without pay because of the evidence collected against him. The prosecutor's office requested a year of preventive detention against John Kelly as the prime suspect in Esmeralda's death. Preventive detention is the imprisonment of a person, not as a punishment for a crime they have committed, but as a means of preventing the possible commission of criminal acts by that person for a period of time. New episodes and interviews with witnesses about the student's death, however, have created even more intrigue surrounding this horrific tragedy. After several interrogations, authorities learned that due to severe bleeding, the entire company had to stop several times along the way to help her. But no one took the bleeding Esmeralda to the hospital or called emergency services. Some of these stocks were captured by surveillance cameras where, according to witnesses, the defendants bought alcoholic beverages and Esmeralda and John went into the restroom together. Later, they also went into the pharmacy to buy medicine, water, and feminine hygiene pads. It was later established that Esmeralda had to completely change her clothes at one of the stops because her own were completely soaked in blood. After Esmeralda was taken home, her parents also noticed that she was bleeding heavily. Thinking it was a woman's menstrual cycle, the mother simply gave her daughter a painkiller to help her fall asleep. It was later discovered from one of the girl's cell phones that Esmeralda had sent her friend an audio message in the early morning hours, asking for help and saying, "Please help me. I'm bleeding." Unfortunately, the friend listened to the recording too late the next day, and Esmeralda was found lifeless on the floor of her bathroom, covered in blood. On February 14th, John Kelly Martinez was arrested by police, and his home was searched the following day. During the search, the clothes he was wearing on the night out with his female students were seized. His cousin, Ruben Murillo, who was the second man present that night, was also accused of trying to hide John's bloody pants. There were many ambiguities in the investigation into the event, and the prosecutor's office should have clarified the situation, rather than making new speculations about an incident that alarmed the public. The public demanded a thorough investigation to determine the real cause of the young girl's death, as many felt that obvious facts on the surface had not been taken into account by the investigators. The investigation involved not only a search of the house where the teacher and his family lived, but also the car in which the crime against Esmeralda may have taken place, triggering the bleeding. The authorities urgently requested the car, but it was discovered that John Kelly's wife had sold it in a hurry. The investigation believed that the hasty sale of the car was an attempt to hide evidence that could prove violent acts. The purchaser of the automobile was Panaga Pilar. After it was learned that a coercive measure would be sought for alleged complicity in the case against Jabe C. Espinal Reggio, John Kelly's wife, and Frank Panaga, the new owner of the car. The vehicle was finally inspected. However, other than traces of Esmeralda's blood found in the car, no other evidence was discovered. The court ruling determined that there was insufficient evidence to keep Jabe C. Espinal Rowe in jail, and she was released. The investigation continued for several months, and the prosecutor launched his own inquiry, re-interviewing the 3 girls who accompanied Esmeralda. Their testimony helped investigators reconstruct the events of that night, minute by minute. At 7:30 p.m., Gene Kelly Martinez, 35, and his cousin Ruben Marilla Martinez went to the home of Esmeralda Riches in La Atre Bande with 3 other girls in the passenger compartment of the car. John excused Esmeralda from her mother, introducing himself as her teacher and telling her of the exciting evening that awaited her daughter and the other students. Esmeralda went along with him. Turned out that originally the whole group was going to go to the fair with amusement rides, but on the way, John changed his mind and altered the destination. Most likely, John Kelly did not intend to go to the fair, but preferred a quiet Mau Beach. On the way to the beach, John stopped the car at a store, where he bought a beer. Returning to the car, he asked his brother to sit in the back seat, while Esmeralda sat in the front. The man had a thermos with him, into which he poured the beer and added 5 unknown pills to the drink. He offered it to Esmeralda without informing her of the contents of the thermos, but one of Jerifens noticed. Arriving at the beach, the 3 girls got out of the car, leaving Esmeralda and John Kelly alone. They were alone in the car for about 30 minutes, and their prolonged absence was noticed by Esmeralda's friends. After a moment, without explanation, John appeared and told everyone to get in the car as they were leaving urgently. They had to make several stops along the way because Esmeralda started bleeding heavily. One of the stops was at 9:45, when they stopped at a gas station parking lot. According to eyewitnesses and CCTV footage, Esmeralda used the cafeteria restroom. Esmeralda's classmate said she asked to stop at the gas station because she needed to visit the ladies' room, and when she went in there with her friends, they noticed her clothes were soaked with blood. There was a lot of blood in the restroom, so much so that the girls had to mop the floor. The girlfriends tried to help Esmeralda. They were very frightened and asked the woman working at the gas station if it was normal. And she said it was not normal and advised them to see a doctor immediately. The girls told John Kelly about it, but the man refused to go to the hospital, saying that if he did, he would go to jail. According to the inspection document, traces of Esmeralda Riches' blood were found both in the parking lot and in the service restroom. At the gas station, they also stopped at a pharmacy at 10:21 p.m., where they bought some medication, water, and sanitary pads. Authorities obtained surveillance footage and a receipt for the purchase to verify the fact. At 11 p.m., John Kelly returned Esmeralda to her home. She arrived with heavy bleeding that began minutes after she was left alone in the car with her teacher. On February 16th, an official report came back stating that Esmeralda had been very severely and brutally abused, resulting in severe blood loss and hypovolemic shock. As hypovolemic shock, as scary as it sounds, this condition could have been stabilized, and medics know how to effectively help a person. But unfortunately, Esmeralda never made it into the life-saving hands of doctors that night. Toxicology testing confirmed the presence in Esmeralda's body of the active ingredient in the pills used to terminate a pregnancy, but it was previously confirmed that Esmeralda was never pregnant. This component is a synthetic gestation with contraceptive effect when taken orally in the recommended dosing regimen. This component suppresses ovulation and fertilization, which most likely indicates that the teacher, John Kelly, was preparing for intimacy with the student he liked. After repeated medical examinations, Esmeralda's body was finally allowed to be buried. The young girl was buried in the Albano Public Cemetery. As Esmeralda's family and friends said goodbye to her, they described her as a kind and cheerful girl. Her parents bitterly recalled that fateful evening and blamed themselves for entrusting their daughter to a teacher and letting her go for an evening walk with him. On June 4, 2023, after reconstructing the last hours of Esmeralda Riches' life, prosecutors filed charges against math and physical education teacher John Kelly Martinez. On June 12, the La Alta Gracia prosecutor's office filed an indictment and a request to open a trial against Martinez and his cousin, Rubiel Milo Martinez, with the La Alta Gracia Instructional Court. The case was scheduled to be heard on August 23, 2023. However, due to the passage of Storm Franklin, the case against the teacher was rescheduled. On November 24, 2023, the judge ordered that John be retried as the sole defendant in the death of Esmeralda Riches. The trial was scheduled to begin on January 9, 2024, but was again rescheduled because only half of the witnesses called were present. The trial is scheduled for February 1, 6, 2024, before the Collegiate Court of the Penitentiary Chamber of First Instance of La Alta Gracia. The defense attorney urged the court to note that his client can only be charged with violence and accuses the parents of not taking action to avoid the death of their daughter, despite knowing about her problem. The prosecution, for its part, presented more than 40 pieces of evidence, including witness testimony and examination reports. During the hearing, the prosecution also heard testimony from pathologists and forensic experts, who showed the audience all the audio and video materials that had been collected during the painstaking and long work to determine the cause of the girl's death. In his closing statement, the defendant tried to make himself look like a victim. John Kelly Martinez admitted that he and Esmeralda were indeed close that night in the car, but he sincerely tried to assure the court and everyone present that everything was consensual. The important fact, he said, was that when he brought Esmeralda home, she was alive and well. The motion to compel specifies that Martinez voluntarily inflicted the victim with lacerations, abrasions, and contusions that resulted in her death, with severe acute external and internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock as the terminal mechanism of death, according to the autopsy report. John Kelly Martinez's speech made no impression on the court or those in the audience. On March 14, 2024, Professor John Kelly Martinez, 36, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for violence. John Kelly Martinez will serve his prison term at the Ana Maria Correctional and Rehabilitation Center in He. Rubiel Maro Martinez, cousin of the defendant charged with accessory after the fact, received a conditional enforcement measure consisting of periodic court appearances. Following the enforcement measure against the professor and his cousin, Riches's family attorney, Raimundo Rosario, said the family was satisfied with the restraining measure and would not file a motion to reopen the investigation. The verdict for Juan eased the pain of Esmeralda's parents a bit. They thanked everyone involved in the investigation and trial. They also indicated that they were satisfied with the verdict. Esmeralda's family did not experience the joy of the teacher's verdict because the acute pain of losing their daughter was forever lodged in their souls. Esmeralda's mother, Isabel Martinez, said she regretted letting her daughter walk with this blessed teacher and 3 friends. I talked to him on the phone and asked, "Are you a teacher?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I told him, "Take care of my daughter. I'm gonna let her out because she's with you." I was innocent that my daughter was with this man. The mother said. The Ministry of Education provided support to the family and relatives of the deceased girl, as well as to the relatives of the other girls who were with Esmeralda on the day of the tragedy. In their message, they expressed their hope that cases of this nature will not be repeated in the education community and in society at large. With the pain of parents who can never come to terms with their daughter's death, they said, it is their turn to fight for justice. A story that began as a fun evening outing with a visit to the beach turned into a night of terror that cost the life of student Esmeralda Riches, who bled to death after lacerations, abrasions, and bruises inflicted by a man whose parents entrusted with the lives of their children. Obviously, everyone involved in the evening's outing has a share of blame. Unfortunately, because of her parents' excessive strictness, Esmeralda was afraid to ask them for help and tell them what had happened. Sometimes we think that it is easier to conceal for fear of punishment or just to remain misunderstood. But what a pity that in this battle, fear wins, taking precious life. Blake Leibel was born in Toronto, Ontario, Canada on the May 8th in 1981. His family was a well-off family right up the tree. His father, Lorne Leibel, is a well-known real estate tycoon and Canadian Motorsport Hall of Famer, while Blake's mother, Eleanor Chaitel, inherited Alrose products from her father, Paul Chaitel. This company makes plastic polytart materials and is reported to generate over $28 million in sales annually. But while grandfather Paul Cheetel was a success, it was reported that he was known to be a control freak and bully. Paul's wife, Blake's grandmother, suffered from a severe mental illness of some kind. The specific diagnosis remains unknown, but what is known is that when Paul Cheetel passed away, he left a will behind that withheld inheritance from his family, pending not only alcohol and drug screening, but also an HIV test. Once relatives successfully passed these stipulations, Paul Cheetel's girlfriend would get 2 Mercedes-Benz cars, a Cadillac, and some other parting gifts, while Blake's mother got a payout of $12 million. Oddly enough, Blake's brother Cody Leibel was cut out of the will, with Paul Cheetel stating that it wasn't out of lack of love, but rather that he knew Cody's father would adequately provide for him. On the other side of the family, Blake and Cody's father, Lorne Leibel, was a man who dated beautiful young women and took them out in fancy Ferraris. He was the envy of any man who set eyes on his fortunes or female companions. When Lorne Leibel split up with Eleanor Cheetel, Blake lived with his mom, while Cody lived with his dad. It was during this time that Blake and his father reportedly became distant and estranged as Blake felt that Lorne wasn't providing enough for him financially. Even so, the Leibel family was, by all accounts, a highly successful one. Even Blake's grandfather, Stanley Leibel, was a well-known sailor who competed in the 1968 Summer Olympics and then later developed hundreds of homes across Toronto. Even Blake's aunt, Terry Leibel, is a Canadian journalist who served as a host for CBC's Olympic coverage during the 1996, 2002, 2004, 2004, and 2006 games. Blake and his brother Cody Leibel were destined for success right from the very start, or at least they certainly had the financial environment around them to allow them to succeed at whatever they put their minds to. As a matter of fact, when Cody Leibel moved to California, he certainly left his mark of success on the world. He even sold his 5,500 square foot home in Beverly Crest for almost $18 million in 2017. The buyer was reportedly Katy Perry. Then later on the same year, Cody bought Reba McEntire's house for a reported $25 million, crowning him the youngest homeowner in Beverly Park history. This move made him neighbors with big names like Sylvester Stallone, Mark Wahlberg, Denzel Washington, and even Eddie Murphy. As the world's youngest owner of a Ferrari Enzo, Cody not only owned a record label, but he was a regular at a poker club called Molly's Game that reportedly hosted famous faces like Leonardo DiCaprio, Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, and Tobey Maguire. Cody Leibel certainly seemed as successful as the family that raised him. Cody's brother, Blake Leibel, moved to California in 2004. He reportedly still received an allowance from his mother that totaled close to $2 million in just 8 years. In 2011, Blake's mother, Eleanor, would die of brain cancer, leaving a huge inheritance behind to Blake and Cody. Roughly 2 years later, Blake challenged his mother's will to remove his father as trustee and deny his brother, Cody, his inheritance. But Blake, who reportedly didn't even attend his mother's funeral, received little sympathy from the courts. But who is Blake Leibel? He wrote and directed a comedy film in 2009 called Bold. It was very low budget and it didn't hit well at all. The movie was a massive flop with a 2.6-star rating on IMDb. But apparently you can still find it on Plex TV if you're curious. Blake Leibel also directed a 2013 film called Soulmates. He's even listed as a creative consultant and director on a few episodes of Mel Brooks' Spaceballs, the anime. In 2010, Blake published a graphic novel called Syndrome. The novel was about a man named Dr. Cheetel, who happens to share the same name as Blake's own mother. In the novel, Dr. Cheetel studies serial killers. He also goes as far as to recruit a town full of actors and then set up a fake Truman Show-style scenario. Next, he fakes the execution of a serial killer before wiping his mind and allowing the memoryless man to run free in the fake town so Cheetel can monitor his actions. The doctor's goal in the book is to cure serial killers. Cheetel's character can be quoted saying that evil is not some mysterious force. Evil is a syndrome. Co-author of the book, Ryan Roberts, stated that Blake told him that he had done a lot of research on serial killers. Ryan also recalled how Leibel jerked his hands upward when showing how a victim could be flipped upside down in order to drain them of fluid. In hindsight, Ryan Roberts said he'll never forget that. While Blake didn't actually write or illustrate the final edition of Syndrome, he was credited as creator of the book, and he wrote an introduction at the start of the novel, asking the question, if you loved hurting things, what would you do? Syndrome, Blake's biggest success, and it ended up with him giving away stacks of the graphic novels for free at Comic-Con in San Diego. A producer said Blake wanted to be a respected comic book artist, and he used his cash to try and buy that image. He tried hard to come across as cool and edgy, but it was clear to everyone that Blake Leibel had some serious mental issues that he needed to address. His mental state had begun to deteriorate, and he was spiraling into a dark abyss. Those close to him had started to recognize the signs, but none could foresee the depths to which Blake would ultimately sink until it was beyond anyone's reach to save him. Blake Leibel had quite the romantic life. In 2006, Blake met a Californian model named Amanda Braun. Amanda was previously in a relationship with Andrew Olchak, who died in prison following convictions for crimes committed as a crooked hedge fund manager. After 5 years of dating, Blake and Amanda finally tied the knot in 2011. Not long after the wedding, Amanda Braun Leibel gave birth to a son. While the couple appeared to live comfortably in their Beverly Hills mansion, Blake continued to cash in and spend his checks pretty much as quickly as he received them. He reportedly smoked weed constantly and came up with various plans for success, but none of his ideas proved fruitful. During this time, one of Leibel's friends said, Blake was developing a dark obsession with brutal violence. It was like Blake was becoming a different person. He was distant and paranoid. Then in the summer of 2015, Blake left Amanda while she was pregnant with their second child. This was reportedly due to his pot-smoking habit consuming his life, but I'd say there was more than a marijuana issue brewing. Blake began isolating from almost everyone as he sank deeper into a world filled with gore, violence, and darkness. He even stopped returning his family's calls and began to suspect that his brother Cody was in deep debt to some Russian gang members, and he was worried it could potentially bring harm back his way. But there was never any evidence that Cody Leibel owed any major debt like that, and no one could understand why Blake's sanity was spiraling out of control. But most of his friends claimed it was initially the death of his mother that brought on this dark madness. Eleanor Chattel's $5,500,000 home in Toronto, plus the $1 million of other dollars acquired due to her death, just wasn't enough for Blake. He was broke, and when he failed to have his mother's will overturned in 2013, he turned to his father to help him pay for his mounting credit card debts. Then Blake was sued by his lawyers for non-payment in the unsuccessful case of Eleanor Chattel's will. After Blake split up with Amanda, he began pitching another original script called Psychopomp. It was about a caped vigilante that cuts off the heads of villains and then uploads his antics to YouTube. But reviewers of the script stated that it was terrible in every way possible. There wasn't one thing about Blake Leibel's new project that anyone liked. It was likened to a bad rip-off version of Batman, where Batman is violent, psychotic, stupid, sadistic, and highly unlikable. Psychopomp was nothing more than a gratuitously violent film, devoid of any imaginative flair. However, there were whispers that Hilary Shore, a producer involved in Children of Men, had expressed interest in the Psychopomp screenplay. Yet, this supposed development never materialized. While married to a pregnant Amanda Braun, Blake had started seeing Yana Kasian, a stunning 30-year-old Ukrainian former attorney from Kiev. In no time, Blake got her pregnant too. And for a while, they seemed happy and healthy as Blake pulled Yana into his fantasy world of Hollywood hot pink. All the while, his mental decline was picking up speed at a volatile pace. In May of 2016, Yana gave birth to a baby girl named Diana, and to outside observers, the new family appeared to be doing well. However, the reality was far from idyllic. Blake harbored intense jealousy towards the infant as a storm of anger raged within him. No longer the sole object of Yana's affection, Blake found himself replaced by baby Diana, pushing him to new heights of psychological instability. He incessantly demanded sexual attention from Yana, threatening to abandon her for another woman if she refused his advances. In an attempt to salvage their relationship, Yana sent her newborn daughter to live with her mother in a nearby apartment, which Blake financially supported. Then, on May 20th, Blake Leibel was arrested for sexual assault not far from his condo. The alleged victim was Blake's third girlfriend, Constance. She'd been living in another house he owned that was also a couple of miles away from his West Hollywood apartment where he lived with Yana. Constance claimed Blake forced himself on her in the house. Buka Fury is known for being a storyboard artist on Aquaman and working in the art department for films like Snow White and the Huntsman, P.S. I Love You, and the Emoji Movie. Blake Leibel was released from custody around 15 hours after he was arrested following a bail payment of $100,000. Yana had bailed Blake out of jail, but finding out about the affair with Constance was the final straw for her. She moved into her mother, Olga Kasian's. There was only one door left to check, and it was locked. The cops tried to force the door open to the bedroom, but a mattress was barricading the door from the other side. The cops shouted for whoever was in there to come out. And that's when Blake's voice finally responded, saying he wasn't going to come out because he was scared that the officers were going to beat him up. They assured him that this wouldn't happen and that they were just there to check on his girlfriend to make sure she was okay. Blake replied back that she was fine. He said she was at the hospital and gave them a room number. He also said that his father would be there soon and that he wasn't coming out until then. Blake was referring to his accountant and mentor, Stephen Green. Blake had called Stephen around noon and asked him to come to the apartment. For a month before Stephen Green received that call, he had been unable to get in contact with Blake Leibel. Green had called, messaged, left voicemails, and even emailed Blake several times, but he never got a reply. Stephen Green even left a voicemail on Blake's phone stating that he was worried about him and that he loved him. He said, whatever was going on, he wanted to help him get through it. But as you're about to find out, it was way too late for that. When Green arrived at the condo, he spoke to Blake through the partially open bedroom door in the apartment. A short while later, a detective arrived on the scene to find Green now in the living room talking to Blake on the phone. Leibel was still barricaded in the master bedroom. When Green hung up the phone, the detective asked him to call Blake back, which he did. After a few minutes of conversation, Blake Leibel finally agreed to come out. He was only wearing boxer shorts when he emerged from the room. Stephen Green gave Blake some clothing to put on. Luckily, officers checked the clothing first and found Leibel's passport and about $4,000 in cash. He thought that he was going to try and make a break for it, but that never happened. As the officers entered the bedroom, one of them screamed, "She's on the bed." The detective immediately ordered everyone to go outside, and he called in the paramedics who were waiting on standby. Sadly, Yana Kasian was pronounced dead at 1:02 p.m. On May 26. Yana Kasian's naked body was lying on a clean sheet and was covered by a red Mickey Mouse blanket on top of a blue polka dot blanket. Her head was on a pillow. There were abrasions and bruising on the left side of Kasian's face, consistent with blunt force trauma. There were human bite marks on Kasian's left jaw and left bicep, as well as fingernail marks under her jawline. Her scalp had been removed from around her eyebrows to the hairline on the back of her head. A large portion of skin on the right side of her face had also been removed. The skull bone was visible. There were cuts across her lower forehead below the eyebrows. There was also a cut on the right side of her face from her cheek to her jawline, and another on the left side of her face toward where the ear should have been, but it was missing. The medical examiner later proposed that a sharp-bladed tool had been used to cut off the skin, but he also noted that some facial tissue had been ripped away by hand. Considering the extensive damage to Yana's face and skull, combined with the challenging nature of both cutting and tearing the tissue, the doctor believed that inflicting these injuries would have been a lengthy process. Moreover, the presence of inflammation in the tissue and bleeding from several severed samples led to the tragic conclusion that Yana Kasian was still alive while enduring this prolonged torture. The examiner also determined that there was no blood in Yana's heart, veins, or arteries. Half of Yana's blood supply was missing. This is highly unusual even considering the weight of her injuries. Gravity wouldn't have been enough to drain that much blood from her body. Her heart would have had to have been pumping the entire time. It was the medical examiner's opinion that Blake may have drained Yana's blood by placing her in the bathtub with her head lower than her feet, and then running water over her head, which could have increased the blood flow and potentially interfere with clotting. Due to the presence of foam in her nostrils, the doctor concluded that Yana was probably submerged in water for at least 30 minutes. Her body was then washed and placed on the clean sheet. Her cause of death was ruled as exsanguination, which is the draining of blood. There was an additional pillow to the left of Yana with an indentation on it. It was as if someone had been laying next to her. There were dried blood stains on the mattress beneath the sheet she lay upon. The investigation uncovered the extent of the violence that had occurred throughout Blake Leibel's condo. According to court documents, blood stains and pieces of human flesh were discovered behind the bed. Blood was also splattered on the wall near Yana's body. A fragment of an eyebrow was found on the floor beside the bed. In addition to the mattress Yana was lying on, bloodstains were present on another mattress from a second bed in the room, as well as on a side table and in various other areas of the bedroom. The mattress that had been used to obstruct the door belonged to the second bed. A clump of hair and a blood-stained razor were found in the trash can. When cops entered the bathroom of the master bedroom, warm water was running in the bathtub. Blood stains and hair could be seen in the tub. A green paring knife with blood on it was found in the top drawer in the bathroom. The oval shape of the bloodstains found on the headboard of the bed and the guest bedroom were consistent with having been made via the top of Yana's scalped head. There was blood on 2 towels, a pillowcase, the floor, and the base of the drapes in the guest bedroom. The drain in the tub of the guest bathroom also tested positive for blood. The same drain contained some freshly cut hair. Chemical testing also confirmed the presence of blood that someone had tried to clean up in areas of the dining room, the hallway, the guest bathroom, and both of the bedrooms. The kitchen garbage disposal also tested positive for blood. Then more evidence was found in the dumpster. Inside trash bags that had been thrown down the garbage chute, mere feet from Blake's condo door, investigators found blood-stained bedding, towels, clothing, bath mats, placemats, a bed skirt with bloody handprints, human tissue, including some pieces with hair that appeared to be scalp, and the missing ear. Samples taken from Blake's hand and fingernails also contained Yana's DNA. Yana's hands showed signs of injury consistent with self-defense. The marks and bruises seen on Blake's face when arrested were most likely inflicted by Yana fighting for her life. The LA coroner concluded that she was kept alive for around 8 hours. He said he'd never seen injuries like that, and he likened them to wartime injuries. Blake Leibel was arrested and charged with the torture and murder of Yana Kasian. It was later discovered that he used her phone to order food to the apartment via Postmates twice during the time Yana was missing. Blake's demeanor on the scene was described as ice cold. He acted as if he didn't even know Yana was dead. When an officer told him, he simply replied, "Well, I guess you'll find out who did it then." Leibel donned an evil grin as officers led him away from the condo in handcuffs. On June 26, 2018, Blake Leibel was sentenced to life without parole. Due to the nature of his crimes, he was eligible for the death penalty. But the DA didn't pursue it, even though doctors deemed Blake not to be insane and stated he was fit to stand trial. It took the jury just 3 hours to deliver a guilty verdict. Blake was also ordered to pay about $43 million to Yana Kasian's family. Cody Leibel was present on every day of the trial. Blake's father never showed up. Yana Kasian had only been living in the United States for a couple of years before tragedy struck. She was working on becoming a translator. What happened to her was absolutely devastating. It was a crime with little motive outside of Blake's narcissistic desire to control women with his allowance. It was as if this aged, evil little boy had never been rejected. And once he was, or rather felt like he couldn't take it. His ego collapsed, and he snatched away the life of his newborn daughter's beautiful mother in the cruelest way possible. Blake Leibel will rot in prison where he belongs, alone with no one, nothing, and no future that will lead to any shedding of light in his direction. Henry Borynski was born in Poland in 1911 and, as an adult, became a Roman Catholic priest. Amid the turmoil of World War II, he was compelled to leave his homeland. He worked as a teacher for a period in Africa before enlisting in the military, serving with the Polish Second Corps for the remainder of the war. He remained with them after the war and arrived in England in 1946. Discharged from military service in 1949, he stayed in the United Kingdom. In October 1952, he was appointed chaplain of the Polish community in Bradford, West Yorkshire. At the time, Bradford housed a significant number of refugees from Central and Eastern Europe who had fled communist regimes in their home countries. The city's refugee population was estimated at around 6,000, with about 1,500 being Polish, like Borynski. Father Borynski's appointment, however, was not without controversy. He was sent to replace Canon Borislav Martinelli, a 58-year-old priest from Lithuania, who had been among the first refugees to arrive in West Yorkshire after World War II. Martinelli had been the first priest to serve the majority of refugees who arrived in England after him. Resentful of Borynski's arrival, Martinelli refused to leave Bradford and continued to say Mass for the small Lithuanian community that still supported him. Father Borynski offered to share duties with Martinelli to ease tensions, but Martinelli declined the offer. While Martinelli had supporters who stayed loyal to him even after Father Borynski arrived in Bradford, Father Borynski was quickly embraced and beloved by the majority of the people he had been sent to serve. While Martinelli's was Lithuanian, he was ethnically Polish and spoke the Polish language, which was one of the reasons he had been assigned to minister to the Polish population in Bradford in the first place. Some of the Poles in Bradford may have supported Father Borynski because he was actually from their native country and had a strong sense of Polish pride. It seems more likely, however, that he received the overwhelming support he had due to his vibrant personality. Canon Martinelli is generally referred to as being cold and dour. Father Borynski, on the other hand, was a dynamic preacher who genuinely enjoyed spending time with his parishioners and took an active interest in them and their daily lives. He was proud of his Polish heritage, and his sense of nationalism inspired his refugee parishioners whose sense of pride in the land of their birth had been beaten down by war, oppression, and exile. On July 13, 1953, Father Borynski arrived at the door of Canon Martinelli's home. When the canon asked him what he was doing there, Father Borynski told him that he had just received a phone call from someone claiming to be speaking on Canon Martinelli's behalf. The caller had asked him to come see Canon Martinelli right away. Martinelli told Borynski that he had not asked anyone to make such a call, and Borynski left. Around 7 p.m. that same night, Borynski answered another phone call at his residence at 82 Little Horton Lane. His landlady, Irene Beck, saw him answer the phone and took note of it because he was behaving strangely. Father Borynski, who was usually gregarious and pleasant, was speaking in short, clipped sentences. He seemed tense and secretive and cupped his hand over the receiver of the phone, so as to keep Irina or her husband from overhearing the conversation he was having in Polish. His strange demeanor worried Mrs. Beck. The last thing Mrs. Beck heard Father Borynski say before he hung up the phone was, "Okay, I'll go in Polish." Father Borynski took his hat and heavy coat, which he should not have needed in the middle of summer, and left the house. He left behind his wallet and his identification papers. This would be the last confirmed sighting of the priest. There is, however, a second-hand report of him running into a parishioner outside of St. Luke's Hospital after he left his lodging. He reportedly told the parishioner that he did not have time to talk because he was off to play detective. Father Borynski's disappearance devastated the members of his parish. The Polish community anxiously looked for opportunities to help in the search for their beloved priest. They feared that foul play was the only thing that could have taken Father Borynski from them, and rumors spread throughout Bradford about who could have harmed him. The first and most obvious suspect was Father Borynski's predecessor, Canon Boleslav Martinelli. After Father Borynski went missing, Canon Martinelli downplayed his resentment of him. He claimed to the police that he had not been dismissed from his parish, but had rather resigned due to health problems, and as such had no motive to harm Father Borynski. This account of him leaving the parish has been widely discredited. As he also pointed out in his interview with police, however, it does seem unlikely that Canon Martinelli's could have been directly involved in Father Borynski's disappearance and presumed death due to his physical condition. Father Borynski was 16 years younger than Canon Martinelli. While at 58, Canon Martinelli certainly wasn't ancient, he would probably be more frail than the 42-year-old Father Borynski. Father Borynski was also known for his particularly solid stature, standing around 6 feet tall and approximately 200 pounds. He would have been difficult for the more slight Canon Martinelli to physically overpower even if the two men had been the same age. There was also a fear that Cold War politics may have caused Father Borynski to meet with foul play. Father Borynski was an outspoken opponent of communism and frequently preached against it in his homilies. In October 1952, he was part of a group of priests who organized a protest against harassment from agents of the Soviet embassy in London, in Bradford, and the Yorkshire area at large. Refugees from countries behind the Iron Curtain had reported being visited in their homes at night by individuals trying to pressure them into returning to their homelands. Others claimed to have received letters that politely asked them to return, but also contained veiled threats about what would happen to their family members who had not been able to escape to England with them if they did not. There were widespread reports of a ring of KGB agents operating in and surveilling Bradford at the time. Fear and paranoia were prevalent in Bradford. Emboldening the community and speaking out against communism were not unique to Father Borynski, however. As communism was hostile to religion, the communist governments of Eastern and Central Europe persecuted both the church and its clergy. This meant that every priest in the West was opposed to communism, at least in theory, and plenty of them preached against it. Father Borynski would not be worth attacking for foreign agents, purely for his protests against communist governments. If he were abducted or killed by foreign agents, it would presumably have to have been because he stumbled upon some sort of specific information about the espionage going on in Bradford, which he potentially could have if he really were playing detective when he left his home on July 13. Soviet involvement in Father Borynski's disappearance seemed to be confirmed in 1962. Bohdan Stashinsky, a KGB officer and assassin who had defected to the West in 1961, claimed to have assassinated Father Borynski using cyanide under orders from Moscow and then buried his body on the Ilkley Moor. 3,000 people from Bradford volunteered to search the moor should Stashinsky's story be confirmed. The story, while it sounded promising, quickly proved untrue. Stashinsky had been in Kiev for training at the time Father Borynski went missing, and he was not trained to use cyanide for assassinations until 1957, 4 years after Borynski's disappearance. Police did search the moor, but found nothing linked to the case. It is also possible that both espionage and professional jealousy resulted in Father Borynski going missing. Bob Taylor, a retired police officer who re-examined police evidence in the case, alleged on a BBC television show in 2003 that Father Borynski had been murdered by the Polish secret police. He further claimed that Canon Martinelli's had been involved in the plot to have him killed. He did concede that Martinelli's may not have wanted Father Borynski dead. Rather, he may have been coerced into helping to get Father Borynski by being told that he was only going to be abducted and that he would have his old position back in his rival's absence. Canon Martinelli's involvement, Taylor claims, was covered up by the Catholic Church. Canon Martinelli's willingly working for communists does seem unlikely. He had survived 18 months in a Soviet prison camp during the Second World War and had himself fled to England to escape the expanding reach of communism. That being said, his anger at being replaced could have been used against him, and his desire to have this wrong being righted may have blinded him to what he was really getting into. It is certainly plausible that he may have been pulled into a plot against Father Borynski with a promise that he could be reinstated to his previous position, not understanding who he was really working with or even what they were really planning to do to Father Borynski. He may not have grasped the reality of what was going to happen to Father Borynski until after he was already gone. Canon Martinelli's may also have gotten a sense that something terrible was going to happen at the last minute and made an attempt to save his rival. It is possible that the first phone call Father Borynski on July 13th was meant to be the original lure to whatever fate ultimately became of him. If Canon Martinelli's did have the phone call summoning Father Borynski to his home, made on behalf of the people he was working with, he may have lied about it once he was faced with Father Borynski. Canon Martinelli's may have sent the younger priest away, claiming to have never asked for such a call to be made in an attempt to save Borynski from the plot against him. While we know Canon Martinellius resented Father Borynski for replacing him, we have no evidence that he would go so far as to want the fellow priest to be murdered. Even if Canon Martinellius was not involved with the plot against Father Borynski himself, that does not mean that he did not know what happened to him. He could have been made aware of what happened to his rival in confession. In the Catholic Church, individuals can confess their sins to a priest and receive absolution for them. Priests are absolutely forbidden to reveal anything told to them during confession. Violating the seal of the confessional and betraying the confidence of someone seeking penance is one of the worst things a priest could do in the eyes of the Church. A priest will be subject to excommunication for doing such a thing. If someone confessed to Canon Martinelli's that they played a part in the death of Father Borynski during the sacrament of penance, he would be unable to do anything about it due to his religious beliefs. A less popular theory of whom may have made Father Borynski disappear holds that he was killed by one of Canon Martinelli's supporters in Bradford. While Canon Martinelli's was nowhere near as charismatic as Father Borynski, he did have parishioners who were loyal to him in the Lithuanian community. If someone confessed to him that they had killed Father Borynski in an ill-advised attempt at helping Canon Martinelli's get his old position back, he could not share that information, and quite possibly felt guilt over being the reason behind another man's murder. Since he could not reveal the crime and felt some sense of responsibility for it, he may have also helped cover it up after the fact. Martinelli purchased 60 pounds of caustic soda around the time Father Borynski went missing. The purpose of this purchase was never determined. Documents from the police files from the original investigation speculate that this amount of caustic soda could have been used to dissolve a body buried underground in a matter of weeks. It is possible that Canon Martinelli's acquired the caustic soda to help Father Borynski's killer dispose of his body. The idea that Martinelli's had information about Father Borynski's fate, whether because he had been involved in bringing it about or just learned of it after the fact, is supported by the apparent decline in his mental status after Father Borynski went missing. 3 weeks after Father Borynski's disappearance, Canon Martinelli's was found collapsed in his study. On his desk, the phrase "keep silent," priest in Polish, had been spelled out using matchsticks to form the letters. Martinelli's told his niece that 2 men had come to his door to speak with him, and he had invited them into the study. He then felt a sharp pain on the back of his head and could remember nothing after that. A neighbor who had helped get the canon out of the house and to the hospital told the newspaper that he had seen a large bruise on the back of his head. Police were skeptical about Canon Martinelli's story from the very beginning. The canon did eventually call the account into question himself as well. Accounts vary, but the canon either told the police that it never happened or that it was possible that he'd imagined it. If the attack never occurred, this would mean that the ominous matchstick message would have been a warning he was trying to get across to himself. In either case, the incident certainly does not indicate that Canon Martinelli's mind was at ease in the aftermath of Father Borynski going missing. Canon Martinelli's did not have to live with this mental stress for very long. He died of a heart attack in 1955, just 2 years after Father Borynski vanished. The shadow of Father Borynski's disappearance was so dark on Canon Martinelli's reputation that the Bishop of Leeds, John Hunan, had to address the rumors of Martinelli's involvement in the case during his funeral mass. He assured the congregation that the idea of Canon Martinelli's being involved in harming priests was absurd. He did concede, however, that the canon's mind had been troubled ever since Father Borynski disappeared. In the years since Father Borynski went missing, the threat of Soviet spies has been lifted from the Polish community in Bradford, but not the desire for answers about what became of their beloved chaplain. While Father Borynski may not be in Bradford anymore, his reputation certainly lives on. His congregates raised their children on tales of the great priest who was mysteriously taken from them too soon. The case of April Jones. April Jones was born on April 4, 2007. The idea for her name came from her birthday. Unfortunately, she was not born as fortunate as other children, as it was revealed that she had cerebral palsy, a condition that affected her mobility. One day, April had been playing outside with a friend for approximately 20 minutes, but she did not return home around 7 p.m., as expected. Her parents had last seen her riding a bicycle. They went out to look for her and found her 7-year-old friend, but April was not with her. The friend explained that April got into a car with a stranger. Her friend was able to describe the man who had abducted April. He was wearing a green jacket and had blue or green eyes, brown hair, and a beard. Significantly, the friend mentioned that April had entered the car on the driver's side. This suggested that the car had a left-hand steering wheel, which is typical in the UK. The police responded promptly, arriving at the scene 8 minutes after the emergency call. They interviewed anyone who might have information about April's disappearance, but the family could not recall any unusual events that day. Earlier, April had attended her swimming class and was allowed to play outside with her friends, which was a typical routine. The news of April's disappearance spread rapidly through the neighborhood, and many locals left their homes to assist in the search. While the community's efforts were well-intentioned, they made the police's job more challenging as the officers had to go door to door to gather information, but many residents were out searching. By the evening of October 1st, the authorities had released additional details about April's disappearance, including what she was wearing, a school polo shirt, and a purple coat. More than 100 people had gathered to support the police in their search efforts. Their expertise can be very useful in locating her. Not only local residents showed up, but also a large number of volunteers from England who crossed the border into Wales to offer their support. Several people from South Wales also traveled up to assist. The search would not be easy as the area around the town was surrounded by mountains, waterfalls, gorges, dense forests, uneven ground, and thick woodlands for miles. Additionally, it was a chilly, overcast autumn evening, and it was raining heavily outside. To ensure the volunteers' safety, the police had to carefully organize their efforts. Several volunteer search teams were now covering an area of about 60 square kilometers around 3:30 in the morning, 8 hours after the first police contact. The volunteers had been diligently navigating the harsh Welsh countryside. Despite conducting searches throughout the night, there was still no trace of April as of October 2nd, 2012. The police in Wales have now issued a child rescue notice, a nationwide alert for police agencies in the UK requesting that they ensure their officers have a description of April and the man who abducted her. This was the first time the entire nation had heard the child rescue alarm. The media was now putting tremendous pressure on the police, 14 hours after April had disappeared, to provide every piece of information they had. It also questioned the way the police handled the probe. After taking over the investigation, Detective Superintendent Andy John began providing the public and media with as many updates as he could. He also placed barricades and instructed his officers to stop any approaching vehicles. Posters with an image of April, who was missing, were displayed in the hope that it would jog someone's memory. People living nearby, as well as those residing farther away, had been providing the police with various reports, as is common in investigations of this nature. Numerous locals identified a man who did match April's kidnapper, Mark Bridger. In general, a man from the area named Bridger was a Land Rover driver. His eyes were blue. He had short facial hair, and above all, he drove a left-hand drive car. Several witnesses claimed to have seen Bridger or his car in the vicinity when April vanished. They found Bridger's last known address and repeatedly tried to contact it, but neither he nor April Jones were there. Bridger had no prior history of legal troubles. Given the large number of volunteers involved in the search, it was impossible to verify the claims made by some residents that Bridger had participated in the initial search for April's disappearance at night. With the limited information available to them and reports from the surrounding community about Bridger's apparent disappearance, the police focused all of their efforts on finding him. Helicopters hovered above the scene, and the police conducted a thorough search of all possible locations for him. They learned that Bridger had just moved into a brand new cottage named Mount Pleasant. Upon their arrival, there were no visible signs of life, and the property was devoid of any automobiles. They went into the cottage and called April's name, but she didn't answer. It was unclear at the moment if Bridger had been hiding from the authorities. A police helicopter had earlier seen him walking his dog near April's home, having apparently tried to disguise himself by shaving his head and beard. Police cornered and questioned him. The policeman questioned, "Where is she?" Bridget just answered, "It was an accident. I crushed her with my car. I don't know where she is." Officers reported that Bridger was very emotional throughout the arrest. The arresting officers read him his rights, which included the following: "You do not have to say anything, but anything you say may be used as evidence." Oddly enough, Bridger was eager to converse, though he was not required to speak. The officers reiterated that he was free to do so. He informed them, I've been looking for her all day and night on foot. My car is in the garage. It is a left-hand drive Land Rover Discovery. I didn't abduct her. I tried my best to revive her, then panicked. I only knew her name this morning when I saw the news on the television. I just wish I could remember where I'd put her. There was no life in her. She was just on the seat. I want to say sorry to the family. They took Bridget to the closest police station. In the meantime, back in April's hometown, police units, search teams, volunteers, and mountain rescuers kept searching every square inch of the Welsh countryside for April. Still, despite everyone's best efforts, they were unable to locate her. Along with the emergency services staff who worked just as hard and determinedly, hundreds of volunteers from across the nation stayed out all night, slept for a few hours, and then resumed their search. The police had received over 600 texts from people volunteering their services and proposing locations to search. Because of this, the police had a large number of volunteers to assist them in their search. And because of their local expertise, they were able to check over 20 distinct areas extensively. The people can occasionally obstruct this kind of investigation. Still, local expertise is essential in remote places like this one, and the police needed all the assistance they could get. At this point, detectives had taken Mark Bridger into custody and were questioning him. Unusually for a man of his standing, he spoke without hesitation. On the contrary, he talked candidly about what had transpired. Right away, he said, "I don't know where she is. Yesterday, I came down to see my daughter's teacher. She had parents' evening, and I then parked up opposite my girlfriend's house, which I believe is not far away from April's mother and father's house. Stupid. I'd had a few to drink, and there were two girls on their bikes. I remember the dark-headed girl came behind the car. I looked to see where the other girl was, and I couldn't see this other little girl. And the next minute, the bike was there." Bridger acknowledged that he was in the vicinity at the time and acknowledged hitting April with his automobile while intoxicated when she was riding her bike. Mark Bridger insists that he never intended to harm April, even though he acknowledges that he was aware of his error. Instead, he maintains that he took off with her in his car. He needed to bring her to the hospital right away, and that's what he realized. "It's okay, Mark. The color had gone out of her. Okay. Her lips were purple. Paul and Cole are friends of mine, and I've killed their daughter." Effective then, without hesitation, Bridger acknowledges that his actions that evening caused April Jones to die. He even goes so far as to say that her parents were friends. However, Bridger's memory tends to deteriorate following the submission. He has been relatively open about his involvement thus far. Actually, these officers may have never had an easier time getting a confession from someone. Bridger can't recall anything about what he did with April's body, though. Following her confession, despite the police's repeated attempts to question him, Bridger's unexpected episode of amnesia persisted. "And I'm in my house, and she's not there being upstairs, and I can't find her. I wouldn't have ditched her. I know that I wouldn't have. I'd have put her somewhere." With Mark Bridger, the cops have been quite cautious thus far. He'd been entirely honest with them. They can make him clam up with aggressive interrogation, but now they start to question his sincerity. The police were aware that there was very little likelihood that Bridger's memory would be blank at the critical moment when April's body vanished. The pressure increased as the cops questioned him. Even though it is evident that he was lying, he persisted in telling his story and got even more upset. In fact, the cops started to wonder if April was dead at all. Was there anything that Mark Bridger was saying that they could genuinely believe? The police decided to give Bridger a platform to give us account of what happened on Tuesday. The day he was holed in, however, the police used it as an opportunity to get more information out of him. "You tell me that when you get out of your vehicle, you look underneath the vehicle and you see April." Yes. Although Bridger insisted that he had run over April, the police received evidence from April's 7-year-old companion that April was okay and had cheerfully gotten into Bridger's car and was grinning. Who would lie like that to a 7-year-old? In actuality, they would not have any cause to, nor would they choose to. We have a witness that was present. This person says that April got into the Land Rover via the driver's door, which on a normal car would be the right-hand side, but that's really the passenger side door on your car. That is a complete fabrication and lies. Can't have happened. Bridger shifted his tone. It was apparent he was unaware that the police had a witness, albeit a 7-year-old one who saw it all. It was clear that the information contradicted his account of events, and he was upset. Regardless of his emotional condition, Bridger remained resilient to the various methods of inquiry, and his version of events held steady. He showed no signs of backing down. The detectives did something. They brought in Dr. Joe Sullivan, one of the world's foremost authorities on criminal body language and conduct. Dr. Sullivan did more than just watch the Bridger interviews. He also went to his house. He wanted to know everything there was to know about this individual in order to create a psychological profile. What he found astounded him. Bridger kept knives, handcuffs, and a shotgun, both hidden and on display at his house. Moreover, he was employed at a slaughterhouse, according to Dr. Sullivan. Bridger was a fantasist who thought of himself as a character akin to Rambo. Stated differently, he was not part of the real world. In defiance of Dr. Sullivan's guidance, the police chose to approach their inquiry in a paternalistic manner. After all, Bridger was a father of 6. Bridger was not going to alter his claims now. Their only chance was with the forensic specialists thoroughly searching Bridger's house. The teams at the house did manage to devise a solution, though. They may have found anyone's blood. They found little specks of it in the restroom. It's possible that Bridger cut himself shaving. It was just that the police were ignorant at this time. After submitting the samples to the laboratory, it can take up to 24 hours to receive the findings. After the police took him in, disregarding his advice, Dr. Sullivan told the officers what he believed Bridget to be. He was unlikely to experience an enormous amount of empathy or have any major sense of guilt about what he had done. Of course, he will inevitably try to present himself as someone who does have those characteristics. But the sense that I had from the information we had gathered, even at that time, was that this is a man who is not going to respond to an appeal to his better nature. According to Dr. Sullivan, there was little need to attempt to appeal to Bridges' better nature. He didn't have one, and he wasn't going to respond to any police appeals for regret, sympathy, or guilt. Now that the police had taken Dr. Sullivan's advice to heart, Bridger was under increased strain on suspicion of murder. They detained him again right away. It was a shocking shock. Bridger turned completely pale. The police had also found explicit photos of children on his laptop. The reason for his second arrest was that he had offensive pictures of kids. The net was getting closer. Bridger now thought the police had more information than they had disclosed. April's parents were unconcerned, even though Bridger seemed to be losing control of the situation. 3 days after April had disappeared on that fateful Monday night, that the police had given up on locating April alive. It's not an abduction case anymore. It's a murder. Naturally, the police kept this knowledge from Bridger. Still, they also made the decision to advise the numerous volunteers who had put in a lot of effort to locate April that it was time for them to head home and leave the situation to the experts. This suggestion met with stiff resistance as hundreds of exhausted volunteers, many of whom were crying. As they departed the site, they had little to show for their efforts. On Friday, for days after April's disappearance, police search teams were out in full force, scouring the area for any clues. Forensic investigators found no proof that Bridger had killed April. Importantly, there was also no evidence supporting Bridger's account. Inspection of his vehicle, a Land Rover, revealed no marks, blood, hair, or skin, contradicting his claim that April's body should have left scratches or traces inside the car. Bridger tried to clarify by saying he did not witness any blood on April after the alleged collision. The child had apparently been run over yet showed no visible injuries. But his narrative and the game he had been playing with the police was about to be exposed as a farce. On Friday night at 6:15 p.m., the lab contacted the detectives. They had matched April's toothbrush DNA to blood spatters found in Bridges' bathroom. They also discovered April's DNA on Bridges' fleece collar and jogging bottoms. After gathering sufficient evidence, the police filed charges against Bridger. They had found sexualized photos of minors on his laptop, which he denied viewing for personal satisfaction despite his internet search history. Bridger had been in custody for 3.5 days by Saturday. As the allotted 96-hour questioning period neared its end, the Crown Prosecution Service had to decide whether to press charges. Just over an hour after the final interview, Bridger remained unfazed upon hearing the charges. There was no remorse or emotion from him. As the prison van arrived, angry bystanders hurled objects and insults at Bridger. Over the next 2 weeks, forensic investigators found increasing blood traces of April at Bridger's house, as well as several broken bones in his fireplace, though it could not be conclusively determined if they were April's due to decomposition. On May 30th, 2013, a jury found 47-year-old Mark Bridger guilty of April Jones' kidnapping and murder. The judge labeled him a chronic liar and pedophile, stating that April was likely not his intended target, but tragically happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Without hesitation, the judge sentenced Bridger to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Bridger maintained his claim that April's death was a horrific accident when his car struck her, but had long lost any credibility. April Jones was a typical young child full of potential whose life was tragically cut short by a single sick individual. Her family, while devastated, expressed relief that Bridget would never be free to harm another child. April's remains were never found in Bridget's house, though 17 bone fragments were recovered, none conclusively linked to her. Her parents pushed for changes to how search engines handle illegal content, leading to new measures by companies like Google and Bing. April's family and friends will always have a void in their hearts that cannot be filled. Wish for them to be able to reconstruct their lives to the best of their abilities. On April 26, 2013, April's funeral service was held in her hometown. May April Jones rest in peace. The Inman family projected an image of perfect harmony to those on the outside. They were regular churchgoers every Sunday toward Portsing. Yet within their tight-knit circle, one could fathom what really happened behind closed doors. Back in 03/00, and Sandra Inman's paths crossed at church. He was 18, she just 16. Their union received their parents' blessing, leading to marriage. The couple made their home in the modest community of Logan, located in Hawking County, Ohio. Bill Inman possessed strong religious convictions and balanced his job in construction with playing musical instruments for the Sky of Faith Evangelical Church in Nelsonville, Ohio. Sandra took on the role of managing the household. In 1984, they were delighted to welcome their son, William Jr. To distinguish between father and son, the head of the family was called Bill, while the younger one was known as Will. As time passed, William Jr. grew up. At age 17, in February 1st, he met a 15-year-old named Summer Cook at church, quite reminiscent of his parents' encounter. Will and Summer maintained a friendship for 3 years before getting married when Summer turned 18 in February 4th. The newlyweds began their life together by residing with Will's parents in a spacious house in Logan, Ohio. In that same year, when Bill reached the age of 39, he envisioned himself as a spiritual guide. Transforming his garage into a makeshift sanctuary, he began hosting gatherings there. Despite local skepticism towards the self-declared minister's actions, his enigmatic garage started to attract neighbors first, then their friends, and more individuals seeking solace through prayer and leaving offerings. By February 5th, and Summer were overjoyed with the birth of their son, Alex. Around this time, financial strains began affecting the Inman household since Bill's religious endeavors were not financially rewarding. This situation led the family to consider relocating to another state in pursuit of better employment opportunities. By February 6th, the Inman family had fully resettled in Florida. Both Bill and Will promptly secured employment in hotel construction. Meanwhile, Sandra and Summer dedicated themselves to homemaking and nurturing young Alex. 2 years later, the Inmans made their way back to Ohio from Florida. By then, they had forfeited their Logan home due to an inability to reclaim it and settled in a rental in Vinton's countryside. Starting a new chapter shortly after their relocation, in February 8th, and Summer welcomed their second child, a daughter named Kelly. By 2010, their family grew with the arrival of another daughter, Alana. As young parents, Will and Summer often sought weekends away for relaxation and rejuvenation. During these times, Bill and Sandra, always supportive, took on the role of caring for their grandchildren. The weekends were filled with joy as they cherished moments with their 3 grandchildren. Inman secured a pastor's license and proclaimed himself the head of the Skinner Faith Church. Alongside his wife, he established a charitable entity named Ranch of Mercy to assist the jobless and homeless. His vision was grand. He wanted to construct a large dwelling for orphans and widows. However, financial resources were quite lacking. To address this issue, Bill conceived a lottery scheme. Each participant would purchase a ticket with proceeds earmarked for building the shelter. The grand prize was either a house or $200,000 plus 99 other significant rewards. The community became aware of this lottery through news and advertisements. Bill initially promoted it door to door, assuring participants of lavish rewards, while emphasizing that surplus funds were destined for providing a haven for the destitute. Priced at $10 per ticket, Bill managed to sell 100,000 tickets, amassing $1 million for the project. The drawing was set for September 2010. In June 2010, personal upheaval struck the Inman family when Summer expressed her desire to divorce Will after 6 years of marriage. This declaration came not long after she had penned a significant entry in her personal diary. "I am utterly exhausted from constantly trying to please everyone around me. Do not deserve happiness? Do I not have the right to love someone and feel that love in return? I'm uncertain if now is the appropriate time, but I feel compelled to share everything with Will. Troubles me deeply, yet he deserves to know the truth. He should be aware that I no longer wish to be with him. I need to be alone to rediscover myself and understand my current identity. At this moment, I feel like a servant, perpetually running around and obeying others' commands. I adore my children with all my heart and would never trade them for anything. However, I don't want them to grow up witnessing their mother merely following orders all the time. I'm unsure how Will might react to this revelation. There's a chance he could become angry, attempt to take the children away, or worse, resort to threats or harm. It's important for our children to see us as equals. I'm aware that Will's parents might turn against me and try to convince me to stay, but such actions won't change anything. Last night, when Will asked me what I wanted, my mind was blank. All I could think of was what I don't want. I don't want to feel unhappy and trapped any longer, but I couldn't bring myself to voice these thoughts. So instead, I sat there in silence. Every day feels like a battle. All I yearn for is rest, to cry and sleep without interruption. But finding a way out of the situation seems impossible at times. My hope is that by the time of my next journal entry, I'll have clarity on how to resolve everything. As the summer progressed, we moved forward with the divorce proceedings. Departing from the Inman residence, I took our son and both daughters along with my personal belongings. We sought refuge at my parents' home. Wanting not to disrupt the children's relationship with their father or grandparents, visits were scheduled regularly for them. 2 months following our separation in August 2010, I began a relationship with Adam Peters while also securing employment at a bank in Logan's downtown area, working in a cleaning capacity due to limited educational background. When September 0 arrived, it marked another significant event, the Ranch of Mercy's house raffle, spearheaded by the Inman family. Although construction on the prize house was supposed to begin, both September 0 and October 0 passed without any progress. No raffle took place, and no explanations were given. The organization didn't seem to rush to refund participants either. By December 1, 2010, the Inmans got a notice requiring them to leave their rented residence due to significant unpaid rent. In response, Summer and Adam went to collect her remaining belongings from the Inman home. However, they were denied entry. This led Summer to call the police, reporting that her estranged husband was intimidating her and preventing her from retrieving her possessions. When the police arrived, Will and his parents continued to block access. Will even escalated matters by threatening Adam and clashing with an officer. Consequently, Summer filed a legal complaint against Will. She reflected on their relationship, recalling how idyllic it seemed before marriage, but lamenting its drastic change afterward. Will's behavior reportedly became very controlling, affecting everything from her diet to household responsibilities and even intimate aspects of their life. She wasn't allowed to sleep without his approval and was confined at home without access to her phone or keys. Summer revealed Will's aspirations for a large family, his interest in polygamy, and his activities on related websites, including posting inappropriate images. She also disclosed threats he made if she pursued divorce, and mentioned how her cats mysteriously disappeared. Will attributed their disappearance nonchalantly to them escaping through an open window. Following Summer's allegations, Will provided his version of events. He justified taking Summer's phone and keys by suggesting he suspected her of infidelity. Regarding the cats, he said that due to their wild behavior and damage caused to furniture and family members, he relocated them to a shelter. As a result of these conflicts and accusations, Will was subjected to a restraining order, preventing him from approaching Summer, and faced penalties and probation amidst further investigations. A fierce battle for custody emerged between the families. The Inmans filed police report against Adam Peters, labeling him a potential threat to the safety of Alex, Kelly, and Alana. Tragically, Summer's life took a dark turn. On the night March 22, 2011, just 25 years old, was finishing her shift at the bank. She wrapped up her cleaning duties after office had closed. Around 11 p.m., she stepped outside to dispose of the trash. Summer had texted her partner Adam to meet her after work, but he didn't find her by 11:30 p.m. Worried, Adam arrived at the bank and began his search. He discovered her personal items scattered near a dumpster in an alley, her phone, keys, and a music player still playing with headphones nearby in the grass. Her jacket lay there too. Alarmed, Adam immediately contacted Summer's parents to inform them of her disappearance and stressed the need to alert the police swiftly. Initially, Summer's parents called the bank, guessing she might have stayed longer for extra work and misplaced her belongings. Security personnel had no clues about her whereabouts. They then contacted Logan police to report Summer missing, emphasizing her punctuality and that she rarely stayed late at work. Police arrived at the scene, where they found Summer's belongings. They heard accounts from 3 eyewitnesses, who saw her abduction about an hour earlier. 2 women out for an evening jog reported seeing Summer as she threw out the trash. At that moment, a white Ford Crown Victoria driven by a blonde woman approached. 2 individuals dressed in black balaclavas exited the vehicle and forcefully grabbed Summer, shoving her into the back seat despite her resistance and cries for help. One bystander's attempt to intervene was thwarted when the female driver incapacitated him with pepper spray, forcing him to retreat. The car quickly left the area. The 2 jogging witnesses immediately headed to the nearest police station to report what they had witnessed. Their account initially faced skepticism from the police, who found their narrative peculiar and doubted its authenticity. Expecting it might be a fabricated story, the police reached the abduction site of Summer Inman just an hour after her parents filed the missing person report. However, initial efforts did not lead to locating the missing 25-year-old. News of Summerman's kidnapping quickly circulated through all local media outlets, capturing the community's attention. Hundreds of Logan's residents united in a concerted effort to locate her. As 3 days elapsed, the possibility of finding Summer safe and sound grew increasingly faint. Throughout this harrowing time, her parents endeavored to maintain hope against despairing thoughts. Shortly before her disappearance, Summer Inman shared a photo on Facebook featuring herself, her new partner Adam, and her children. The image portrayed them as a content family unit. Will Inman, who had access to Adam Peters' Facebook page, surprisingly still on his friends list despite being Summer's current partner, noticed this update. It raises an intriguing question. Why would a husband befriend his wife's new companion? The backstory revealed that Adam, a man without stable employment, had been hired by the Inmans a year earlier for various household tasks. It was then that Adam and Summer crossed paths and developed a bond. Despite initial reluctance, Summer eventually reciprocated Adam's affections. Her diary entry reflects this internal conflict. When I looked into his eyes, I realized that the devil had taken over me. I didn't listen to what God was telling me. I tried to stop. My mind screamed, "Run, get out of here now." But instead, I stayed and let him embrace me and then delve deeper. I am very sorry about this. "I am guilty." This encounter signified the unraveling of Summer's life within the Inman family. Yearning for happiness and love, she initiated divorce proceedings which were prolonged 5 days before vanishing. Will tested the proposed spousal support per child monthly, suggesting a reduction to $50 given his annual earnings of just $6,000. Will and his parents sought full custody of the children, but their petition was rejected by the court. After losing contact with their grandchildren, Bill and Sandra visibly deteriorated. They lost weight and were clearly affected, as those who knew them concurred that the grandchildren were the light of their lives. In March 2011, amidst the investigation into Summer's disappearance, the Inman family was located. They were found at the residence of Bill's 70-year-old mother in Jackson, Ohio. Bill, Sandra, and Will collectively asserted their ignorance regarding Summer's abduction. The Inmans recounted that on the night of Summer's kidnapping, they were en route to Cleveland to view a new property. However, they encountered car trouble after 3 hours on the road, leading to an overnight ordeal of vehicular repairs on the roadside before returning to Logan the next morning. They maintained that their interactions with Summer were generally amicable with infrequent disputes. Yet they attributed a shift in their familial harmony to Adam Peters' employment in their household, describing this phase as challenging. The trio consistently portrayed Adam as a negative influence, alleging he was the catalyst for the disintegration of their previously harmonious and tightly knit family. The investigation took a crucial turn when police noticed a white Ford Crown Victoria at the Inman family's residence. Upon inspection of the vehicle, a GPS receiver was confiscated. Subsequent examination revealed that on March 22nd, the day Summer was abducted, this car was in Logan. The GPS was deactivated at 5:30 p.m. that evening and reactivated the next morning again in Logan, contradicting the Inman's claim of traveling to Cleveland. Phone records further corroborated that all 3 family members were in Logan on both March. Additional inquiries revealed that on the morning of March 23rd, around 7:30 a.m., the Inmans were at a car wash engaging in a thorough interior cleaning of a vehicle. Bill, Sandra, and Will were all present, but Summer was notably absent following this event. They visited an auto shop in Cleveland for a tire change. While there, a shop employee noticed something odd. Bill was choosing to replace nearly new tires with used ones, simply because he didn't like his current set changed. There was also evidence that the Inmans attempted to modify the car's appearance. Notably, Bill had removed a police bill, Sandra, and Will Inman were apprehended and brought in for interrogation. Prior to their arrest, Bill assured his elderly mother of their innocence, attributing the situation to a test from the devil. Throughout the questioning, they consistently claimed they were unaware of Summer Inman's abduction and didn't know who the kidnapper was. However, after several hours and faced with the possibility of capital punishment if convicted, Sandra Inman's resolve faltered. Eventually, she disclosed the truth. Sandra confessed that they were responsible for Summer's abduction on the night of March 22nd. She detailed how Bill and Will had disguised themselves in black masks. Sandra admitted that her initial plan was merely to abduct and intimidate Summer. However, events took an unexpected and tragic turn. According to Sandra's confession, when Summer was forcibly placed in the car's back seat, Will restrained her with plastic ties around her neck, hands, and feet, intending merely to frighten her into granting him access to their children. As the situation escalated, Will realized that Summer was on the brink of unconsciousness. He panicked and desperately searched for a knife to release her, shouting frantically to his mother, "Oh my God, Mom, where's the knife? I can't find it." Amidst their collective fear and desperate search for the knife, the situation worsened. Summer ceased breathing and tragically passed away. Sandra maintained that their objective was never to take Summer's life. They merely sought a resolution to their custody dispute and hoped to ensure regular visits with their grandchildren. On March 29, 2011, after the kidnapping, Sandra Inman disclosed the location of the body. Summer's remains were found in a septic tank on the grounds of Skinnier Faith Church near Nelsonville, about 30 kilometers from her workplace. Bill Inman had been involved in the church's construction. This place held personal significance for him and Sandra, as it was where they had married 28 years earlier. The Inmans were regulars at this church. Bill participated in its musical ensemble. Police uncovered the well by removing a concrete slab and unscrewing 6 bolts from the metal lid. When they opened it, they immediately saw Summer's legs. She had been thrown headfirst into the septic tank, still wearing her work attire. Her black t-shirt bore an ironic inscription, "I don't have anger issues, I have issues with idiots." A forensic examination confirmed that Summer had succumbed to strangulation. Apart from marks on her neck, hands, and legs indicating she'd been restrained, no other injuries were found on her body. This highlighted strangulation as the cause of her tragic demise. Sandra revealed that she originally planned to dispose of the body in a river, but reconsidered and decided it would be safer to conceal it in the well near the church. She believed this location would ensure it remained undiscovered for a long time. Sandra admitted to feeling deep shame for her actions and their irreversible consequences. During the subsequent trial, 49-year-old Bill Inman and 28-year-old Will Inman did not take any responsibility for Summer's death. Throughout the proceedings, they stayed mostly silent, showing no visible emotions and avoiding eye contact with Summer's grieving parents. Sandra Inman, at 47 years old, stood out as the only family member who accepted responsibility for her part in the tragic events. She maintained that the plan to intimidate Summer was entirely her own idea. In a deeply emotional moment before sentencing, Sandra, overcome with tears, faced Summer's parents and begged for their forgiveness. Her speech, though broken by sobs and a quivering voice, clearly expressed remorse. Sandra admitted she saw Summer as a daughter and regretted her catastrophic decision. In 2012, the verdict was handed down. All 3 members of the Inman family were convicted. Bill and Will Inman received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Sandra Inman also got a life sentence, but with eligibility for parole after serving 15 years. However, among friends and church members familiar with the family's dynamics, doubts arose about Sandra being the mastermind behind the crime. It was commonly known that Bill had a dominant role in the family and usually made final decisions on all matters. Will, on his part, was seen as a pampered child, whose desires were always met by his parents. Those close to the family speculated that Sandra's confession might have been a strategic move to reduce legal consequences for her husband and son. Currently, Alex and Alana are being raised by Summer's family. For quite some time, it was hard to explain to these grandchildren where their mother, father, grandmother, and grandfather had gone. Tara Tracy loved Christmas. The 25-year-old married mother of 4 was known to put up her Christmas tree in October so she could savor the season for longer. Tragically, in 1999, she would not get to see her favorite holiday. Tara spent December 23, 1999, celebrating her son Paul's 7th birthday. She then went to work her overnight shift at the Pantry, a convenience store directly across the street from her home. Tara enjoyed her job because it allowed her to be at home with her children during the day while her husband was at work, and she did not have to worry about transportation to get there. A family friend saw Tara at the store at 3:15 a.m. on Christmas Eve. At 4:20 a.m., a bread delivery man arrived at the store. He found Tara bleeding badly behind the counter and the store in disarray. Tara was rushed to the hospital, but died soon after she arrived. She had been stabbed multiple times and defensive wounds on her hands show that she fought her attacker fiercely. The cash register had been knocked over and some cash, less than $50, and some cigarettes were missing from the store. While robbery would be an obvious motive in the murder, certain details make those close to the case believe that there was a more personal motive at play. The instrument used to stab Tara has been described by the police as unique. They have never publicly identified what it was to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation. They have stated, however, that it is something that a robber would not normally bring with them to commit a robbery. Tara's family also believes that she knew her killer because her keys were found in the door, meaning she let the assailant into the store, which she would not have done for a stranger while she was alone at night. Tara's husband moved their children away almost immediately after the murder, not being able to cope with living so close to the scene of the crime. Tara's mother, Janice Hamilton, lost her other daughter Nikki just 17 months after losing Tara, when she was killed by a drunk driver. On Memorial Day, The pantry is now a BP station, and Tara's home was eventually demolished. A CVS now stands in its place. Police say they have persons of interest in Tara's case, but the case remains stalled. Nick Jabe Triant, 82, and his 74-year-old wife, Dimitra, were originally from Greece. They had owned and run a hotel in Wisconsin, but had retired to the warmer climate of Clearwater, Florida. They liked to drive to the beach at dusk and spend hours watching the waves roll in with friends from the local Greek community. On Christmas Eve of 1968, a neighbor of the couple's knocked on their door. They had Christmas presents to deliver. The neighbor did not receive an answer, so they peered into the house through the front window. At first, the view was festive. The lights on the couple's Christmas tree were blinking, and a pile of Christmas cookies were on a tray on the kitchen counter. Then the neighbor noticed the terrible scene on the living room floor. Both Dimitra and Nick lying on the floor, both in their pajamas. They had both been beaten about the head. Dimitra was dead by the time police arrived. Nick was alive, but barely clinging to consciousness. He was able to speak, but was reportedly rambling incoherently. He managed to cling to life for 3 more days in the hospital before finally passing away due to his injuries. There had been a recent robbery in the neighborhood, and several items were missing from the couple's ransacked home, leading police to believe that the couple had been killed after interrupting a burglary. The couple did not have a lot of money, so the killer would have only gotten a few pieces of jewelry in exchange for the lives of the couple. There were no witnesses to the crime, leaving police only known burglars to interview. They quickly ran out of leads to follow. The couple's granddaughter, Nikki, has continued to stay in contact with police in the 50 years since the murders, spurring them to continue trying to solve the case. Normally, she and her mother and brother would have been at Clearwater visiting her grandparents for Christmas on the day they were murdered. But Nikki, 18 in 1968, had returned from college with the flu, causing the trip to be postponed that year. Police continue to submit evidence from the scene for a forensic examination, hoping that advances in technology will help identify whoever killed the couple. But their efforts have yet to make such an identification. Randall Brown was 47 years old and lived in Clearwater, Florida. He was employed as a flight instructor. On Christmas Eve of 1973, he failed to arrive at work, which was out of character for him. His employer called the police. When they arrived at Randall's 8th floor apartment at 9 a.m., they immediately knew something was amiss due to the state of the apartment. They discovered Randall's body inside of a closet. He had been shot and suffered blunt force trauma. Despite the disarray at the scene, police found no signs of forced entry, implying that Randall had willingly let his killer into his apartment. Randall was active in the local bar scene, so he may have met someone while he was out and brought them home. Randall was also openly gay and had dealt with issues in the past with individuals who were hostile towards this aspect of his identity, collecting evidence early on in their investigation. They found fingerprints at the crime scene and found Randall's car on Mandalay Avenue. The car was still in Clearwater, but was on a different island that was part of the city than Randall's apartment. Investigators also learned that Randall's credit cards had been found in the early hours of the morning by a police officer near a dumpster in St. Petersburg, Florida, 20 miles south of Clearwater. The fingerprints had never been matched in any database, and police found no witnesses in either Clearwater or St. Petersburg. Randall's case went cold. In 2013, the Clearwater police spoke to the local media about Randall's case, along with the Jitrans, in hopes that their shared date of Christmas Eve would increase interest in the case and encourage individuals with information about them to come forward. The effort was unsuccessful, but Clearwater police continue to investigate both cases. Max received an urgent call from his close friend, Jonathan Hoffman, on May 18, 2012 at 5 p.m. Both were seniors at Farmington Central High School in the affluent West Bloomfield area near Detroit, Michigan. Their friendship began in 9th grade during an English class and was sparked by a mutual appreciation for Tupac, one of the most influential figures in American hip-hop. Jonathan confided in Max that he had recently failed a court-mandated drug screening. He had been on probation since authorities found a prohibited synthetic substance in his vehicle 2 months earlier. Jonathan expressed concern over his grandmother Sandra's intense anger towards him. At 17 years old, Jonathan had been living in his grandparents' apartment for 9 months following his parents' divorce and their relocation to Arizona. Initially, Jonathan went with his parents to Arizona. However, shortly after their arrival, the family was dealt a severe blow when his younger sister, Jessica, was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor. This necessitated multiple surgeries and ongoing medical care. Adapting to a new school while coping with his sister's health issues left Jonathan feeling unhappy and despondent. Jonathan was overjoyed when his grandmother Sandra suggested he return to West Bloomfield and stay with her until he completed high school. The prospect of reuniting with friends and familiar surroundings excited him. Nevertheless, not everyone approved of the arrangement between Jonathan and his grandmother. Jonathan's father, Michael, a prominent attorney for many years, had observed some disconcerting traits in Sandra's personality. 74-year-old Sandra Lane, a retired educator and mother of 5, could be exacting and stern. While she cherished her grandson deeply, along with her 85-year-old husband Fred, the situation presented its challenges given the teenager's yearning to reconnect with friends during what should have been a stable final year at Farmington Central High School. Jonathan's father eventually conceded, allowing him to thrive once again at Farmington High School. There, he was recognized as the class clown, an exceptionally intelligent student, and a tech whiz. He had secured a full scholarship to Eastern Michigan University. His peers saw him as a spirited, cheerful, and optimistic individual. That's why Jonathan's call to Max caused such alarm. He didn't sound like himself. His voice carried not only concern, but also palpable fear. The friends decided to meet up later that same day, and Jonathan promised he'd text within the next 30 minutes to confirm the time. Max waited for the message, but 40 minutes passed with no word from his friend. Growing impatient, Max decided to call Jonathan directly. The phone rang and rang without any response. Unbeknownst to him at the time, Jonathan would never be able to reply again. Just before this incident, around 5:20 p.m., the West Bloomfield Township Police Department received an emergency call from Sandra Lane's residence, Jonathan's grandmother's home. The young caller informed the dispatcher he had been shot and struggled for breath over those 3 minutes. He begged for help, stating that he was on the brink of death. The assailant had already fled the scene without seeking aid. The subsequent events were even more horrific. The emergency dispatcher listened as Jonathan frantically called out for help before several gunshots rang out again. His screams of pain were followed by faint words that he was dying. Then came a short silence before a woman's scream echoed through the line, leading to an eerie quietude. By about 5:30 p.m., West Bloomfield police arrived at Sandra Lane's condo in the serene Maple Point gated community, a neighborhood known for its low crime rate and predominantly inhabited by retirees. A resident had reported hearing gunshots in this typically peaceful area. As officers disembarked from their vehicle onto the neatly kept lawn, they headed into what would become one of their most chilling calls yet. Another gunshot reverberated from within the residence. Before the officers could make their way inside, a woman appeared at the front door. The officer's instructions to disarm herself. She was a small, elderly woman with fading red hair, her clothes spattered with blood. With her hands raised in surrender, she informed the officers that she had just taken her grandson's life. This revelation stunned the officers, yet it paled in comparison to what awaited them inside. As they entered the condo, the officers were confronted with a ghastly scene. Blood and smudges were present in nearly every room. Bullet impacts marred both walls and furnishings, and empty shell casings littered the ground. Near the entryway lay a discarded 9mm Glock 17 semi-automatic handgun. Subsequent forensic analysis would uncover additional magazines for the firearm hidden within the residence. On the upper floor, police found 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman sprawled face down in a pool of blood. He suffered from multiple gunshot wounds across his chest, arms, back, and stomach, indicating that many shots were fired at close quarters. Emergency medical personnel swiftly transported him to Botsford Hospital, clinging to hope they could save him. Sadly, by 6 p.m., Jonathan succumbed to his injuries. Sandra was taken to the closest medical facility. As a precautionary measure, medical professionals conducted various examinations to confirm her well-being. The next day, Sandra Lane faced charges for her grandson's homicide and was detained without bail while awaiting trial for either first or second-degree murder. Her guilt left to be determined by a jury. Throughout this ordeal, she maintained her innocence. News of this incident plunged Jonathan's family, friends, and neighbors into deep sorrow and shock. They all pondered what could have driven Sandra to turn a firearm on her dearly loved grandson. The news of this tragic event spread rapidly through the tranquil neighborhood, with media outlets speculating on various theories. Whispers suggested that Jonathan had failed a drug screening test. Journalists highlighted a narrative involving two neglectful parents who left their substance-dependent teenage son in the care of elderly grandparents. Based on the grandmother's testimony, it was revealed that at the time Jonathan's passing, he had an illegal synthetic drug in his system, which had previously caused him complications. His death shortly after another sensational incident involving hallucinogen consumption. Just 2 weeks prior, another youth under the influence of drugs assaulted his family with a baseball bat, resulting in a fatal event. Taquia Cipriana and his accomplice consumed a prohibited substance before attacking their parents. Sandra Lane's attorney argued that she had legitimate concerns for her safety due to managing a young man on probation who was difficult to restrain. It was widely reported that this particular drug could induce aggression in users. If an incident similar to Taquia's had occurred at Sandra's residence, could her actions against Jonathan be justified as self-defense? This was the reasoning Sandra provided to both the police and jury. She asserted that since Jonathan's return to West Bloomfield, he had become unruly and exhibited aggressive behavior. Sandra claimed that he rarely left the house and mingled with teenagers addicted to dangerous synthetic drugs. Sandra also stated that Jonathan's parents did not inform her about his addiction before his arrival and showed little concern for his activities during his stay. Michael, Jonathan's father, was portrayed as having abandoned him. Jonathan frequently had fits of rage, destroying objects and damaging furniture in his room. When upset or during disputes, he would lash out, even breaking his own possessions like his computer monitor and phone. Authorities confirmed that Jonathan had a history with illegal substances. On March 17, 2011, he was apprehended and penalized for possessing hallucinogenic drugs. Subsequently, in court, he received a 93-day deferred sentence along with a year of probation and the requirement for random drug screenings related to these substances. Jonathan's acquaintances shared with law enforcement their concerns regarding his drug habit and their efforts to redirect him away from it. Sandra exerted considerable effort to assist Jonathan in reforming his ways, focusing on his academic performance and adhering to her guidelines. Nevertheless, he resisted these attempts, displaying defiance, erratic behavior, and occasional aggression. Fred confirmed that from the moment Jonathan arrived, there were continuous and intense disputes between him and Sandra. She even contacted the police multiple times due to Jonathan becoming utterly unmanageable. She sought assistance from the school as well, but all efforts proved futile. Sandra recounted an incident where Jonathan, under the influence of drugs, lost complete control. This situation necessitated hospital staff to restrain him to a gurney. The elderly woman implored his parents for help. However, his father remained indifferent and did not return to Michigan. Gradually, Sandra began fearing for her safety. She confided in her husband about her concerns regarding their grandson and his disreputable associates. In a bid for self-protection and to safeguard her elderly husband, feeling cornered with no other option, Sandra acquired a Glock 17 pistol for defense in case Jonathan or his friends became aggressive. On the critical morning of May 18, 2012, took Jonathan for a drug test that returned positive for illicit substances. Jonathan was instructed to undergo another test later that day. Upon receiving another positive result, he became furious while in his grandmother's vehicle. He resorted to swearing violently, kicking the dashboard, and at one point, seizing the steering wheel, compelling Sandra to halt the car multiple times. Jonathan even attempted to snatch the car keys at one juncture. Upon their return home, the confrontation intensified. Apprehensive that he might be incarcerated, Jonathan decided to flee immediately to Arizona. He demanded $2,000 and the car keys from his grandmother. She complied with neither request. When Grandpa Fred took the dog for a walk, Sandra felt overwhelmingly frightened and attempted to pacify the teenager to no avail. She retreated to her bedroom and retrieved the loaded pistol, hoping it would compel her grandson to heed her words or at least acknowledge her presence. Upon returning upstairs to Jonathan's bedroom and finding him in the bathroom, instead of heeding her, the boy hurled insults, kicked her in the abdomen, and struck her on the head. A struggle ensued during which Sandra discharged the firearm. She then fled to the basement in a state of panic, seeking refuge. After a while, she ventured upstairs to check on him, only for her grandson to assault her once more, attempting to wrest the gun away. In the ensuing lull, she shot again in self-defense. This narrative paints a picture of elderly individuals trapped in a dire predicament that tragically culminated in Sandra shooting her beloved grandson out of genuine fear for her own life. However, questions remain as to whether Lane's account is entirely accurate. As the investigation deepened, a contrasting narrative began to surface, one that was still tragic but considerably more concerning. Initial claims by Sandra regarding Jonathan's alleged violent nature didn't align with the experiences of those who knew him personally. Contrary to portraying him as aggressive, interviews revealed that at school, Jonathan was known as humorous and peace-loving. He was always quick to diffuse conflicts with his humor and intelligence. Friends also testified that they hadn't observed any recent changes in his demeanor. Furthermore, Jonathan was described as having a very lean build, standing at just 1.67 meters tall and weighing merely 50 kilograms, hardly fitting the profile of a physically intimidating person. His stature was notably similar to his grandmother's. It appeared that instances of Jonathan's so-called rage were exclusively reported by Sandra, a claim now met with skepticism. Fred, Sandra's husband, acknowledged witnessing heated arguments between his wife and grandson. Despite being present at home almost all the time, there was never any physical violence. Sandra played a key role in overseeing Jonathan's education, establishing strict expectations, which the teenager had difficulty meeting. Fred even suggested sending Jonathan back to his parents in Arizona. However, Sandra rejected this proposal, contradicting her claim that the boy was unmanageable under her care. Jennifer, Sandra's daughter, told the police that during the 9 months, Jonathan stayed with his grandparents. He maintained daily communication with her and visited them monthly. Throughout this period, Sandra never reported any issues between her and Jonathan, nor did she express feeling overwhelmed by his presence. When Jennifer learned about Jonathan's legal troubles involving illicit substances, she discussed possible solutions with her mother. She considered either rehabilitation or sending him back to Arizona. Sandra convinced her that she could handle the situation independently. Reluctantly, Jennifer agreed to leave her son in her parents' custody, a decision that would later prove tragically significant. Authorities were summoned to the Lane household on 2 occasions. The first call came in March 2012 when Jonathan himself dialed emergency services. He was distressed after consuming magic mushrooms and experiencing severe paranoia, fearing for his life. Upon arrival, police noted that he showed no aggression, but was terrified upon seeing them. He eagerly embraced one officer before being secured to a stretcher for his protection and transported to a medical facility. Just 4 days after this incident with magic mushrooms, Sandra Lane reached out to 911 again. She reported that her grandson was enraged and attempting to flee, while Jonathan informed the dispatcher that his grandmother was forcibly trying to confine him in her vehicle. When officers arrived, they encountered Jonathan vocally berating his grandmother. The law enforcement officials then proposed intervening with the irate youth. Sandra opted to handle the matter herself. This episode was recorded in the police files as a routine verbal dispute between a guardian and a child, which was settled amicably. However, for the detectives leading the investigation, this case increasingly seemed less about a rebellious teenager spiraling out of control and more about a woman enforcing her authority over a defiant child. The hearing on April 12th regarding the possession of prohibited substances and subsequent probation had evidently enraged Sandra. She believed she could discipline her grandson effectively. Up until that point, Sandra had been resolute in steering Jonathan onto the correct path. Yet, as graduation neared and her opportunities dwindled, this mission began to look like a failure. In that moment, Sandra faced many choices. She could have contacted her daughter or sent Jonathan for rehabilitation. Instead, she acquired a semi-automatic pistol and took several shooting lessons at a firing range. Determined to prevail in this conflict and assert control over her unruly teenage grandson at any cost, for days after Jonathan was placed on probation, Sandra Lane applied for a license to carry a firearm. On April 18th, she purchased a 9mm Glock, explaining to the store owner that she needed it for home protection. She chose a weapon intended for lethal force, along with ammunition containing expanding bullets, designed to inflict maximum damage. After buying the pistol, Sandra trained at the nearest shooting range until she felt proficient in handling it. She kept her newfound expertise hidden from her husband, who remained unaware of the gun's presence in their home. He was quite taken aback when he discovered how much his wife had managed to achieve covertly. On the fateful day of May 18, 2012, and Jonathan returned home at around 5 p.m. Sandra then requested her husband, Fred, to take their dog for a walk and insisted that he remain outside until she gave him permission to return. Their outdoor time extended for so long that both homeowner and dog grew weary. They ended up sitting together on the grass watching a basketball game. As Fred Wayne, the grandfather of the deceased high schooler, recounted during an interview when they heard police sirens, he failed to grasp the situation. Why did Sandra want Fred to leave them? It seemed less like the action of a woman fearing for her life and more like someone with a plan, intent on carrying it out without interference or witnesses. If Jonathan was as agitated as described by his grandmother, it's unlikely Fred would have left them alone. However, more compelling evidence against Sandra was yet to come. At that same time, 5 p.m., Jonathan was talking with his friend Max about their evening plans. Max informed the police that Jonathan's tone wasn't angry or excited. Instead, he sounded frightened. He was worried about failing a drug test and anxious about his grandmother's reaction. Jonathan mentioned that Sandra was so furious, she threatened to send him back to Arizona. Sandra claimed her grandson violently assaulted her, striking her in the head and abdomen before she discharged the firearm. Medical personnel from the nearest hospital examined her immediately after the incident, but found no injuries or bruises. Ballistic evidence revealed Sandra fired the weapon more than 10 times throughout various locations in the house. 6 bullets struck Jonathan. 2 shots were aimed at his back, indicating he attempted to flee from Sandra. Another shot struck him in the abdomen while he was wounded and conversing with a 911 dispatcher. The police were convinced it was Sandra chasing Jonathan, not the other way around. The grandmother sought to punish her grandson for his perceived wrongdoing while he sought refuge. At some point, she descended to the basement to reload her pistol, likely when Jonathan ascended to his bedroom to call 911 and subsequently returned, shooting him at close range while he lay on the floor bleeding. The final conclusive blow against Sandra's claims of self-defense came from the toxicology report. According to the report, at the time of the shooting, Jonathan's bloodstream didn't contain any prohibited substances. Only a metabolite of a harmful drug was identified in his urine. The forensic examiner clarified that the residual traces discovered in the urine indicated that all substances had left his body and had no impact on Hoffman's behavior. In other words, Jonathan was entirely lucid when Sandra opened fire on him. Consequently, the jury dismissed the defendant's self-defense claim. On March 19, 2013, was convicted of a serious crime against her grandson, Jonathan Hoffman. Prior to sentencing, the elderly woman expressed regret for her actions, pleading for understanding. She claimed that her intention had not been to take the teenager's life, but rather to help him resolve his issues together. Meanwhile, her daughter, Jennifer, urged for the harshest punishment for her mother. She asserted that Sandra Lane was utterly malevolent and would undoubtedly repeat her actions if given the opportunity. Jennifer depicted her mother as a monstrous and obsessed individual fixated on academic achievement. She firmly believed that everything Lane had stated in her statement was falsehoods. She concluded by stating that her son now resided in heaven, a place where Sandra would never have access. Lane received a minimum sentence of 20 years in addition to a mandatory 2-year term for utilizing a weapon in the commission of manslaughter. Her lawyer had pleaded on her behalf, citing concerns about her potential survival during an extended prison confinement. Jonathan's funeral occurred on May 22, 2012, with approximately 700 people who had known and cherished the young man in attendance. They fondly recalled moments spent with him and cherished him as a cheerful individual who never failed to bring laughter to those around him. As a grandson, Jonathan fell short of his grandmother's expectations, ultimately leading her to conclude that he did not belong in this world. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.